The screams pierced the otherwise tranquil Montana afternoon, sending flocks of birds scattering into the cloudless sky. Matthew Rhodes reined in his stallion atop the ridge, his keen eyes scanning the valley below where a plume of dust rose from what appeared to be a freshly collapsed homestead cabin. Without hesitation, he dug his spurs into his horse's flanks, sending them racing down the slope toward the disaster. It was the spring of 1873, and Matthew, known throughout the territory simply as Matt, had been trailing a herd of wild mustangs when the commotion caught his attention. As he neared the cabin, the extent of the devastation became clear. The modest wooden structure had completely caved in, likely due to the recent heavy rains that had softened the ground beneath its foundation. "Hello," Matt called out, dismounting before his horse had fully stopped. "Anybody in there?" A faint cry answered him, not the wail of a grown person, but the unmistakable sound of an infant. Then came a woman's voice, weak but determined. "Help us, please." Matt tossed his hat aside and rushed to the rubble. Through a small gap in the collapsed timbers, he could make out a pale face, streaked with dirt and blood. A young woman, no more than 25, was pinned beneath a heavy roof beam, cradling a bundle protectively against her chest. "Madam, I'm going to get you out of there," Matt promised, already assessing the tangled mass of wood and debris. "Just hold on." "My baby," she whispered. "Please save my baby first." The pleading in her eyes struck him like a physical blow. Matt had seen his share of desperate situations in his 30 years, but something about this woman's courage in the face of her own peril awakened something long dormant within him. "I'll get you both out," he assured her, his voice steady despite the urgency of the situation. "What's your name, madam?" "Dahlia," she replied, wincing as she shifted slightly. "Dahlia Carter. I'm Matthew Rhodes. Everyone calls me Matt." He began moving smaller pieces of debris away from the opening. "And who's this little one?" "Sarah," Dahlia said, glancing down at her whimpering child. "She's only 4 months old." Matt worked methodically, his powerful hands gripping and tossing aside splintered boards and broken furniture. The midday sun beat down mercilessly, and soon sweat soaked through his faded blue shirt. He stripped it off, using the fabric to protect his hands as he clawed through the wreckage. Time seemed to slow as he dug. Minutes stretched into an hour, then 2. His fingers bled from countless small cuts and splinters, but he barely noticed the pain. All that mattered was reaching the woman and her child before the unstable structure collapsed further. "How are you holding up, Dahlia?" he called periodically, needing to hear her voice to know she remained conscious. "I'm still here," she would answer, each time a little weaker than before. "Sarah's sleeping now, I think she's all right." Matt redoubled his efforts, moving a particularly heavy beam that had been blocking his path. The wood groaned ominously as he shifted it, and Dahlia cried out in alarm. "Don't move," she gasped. "The whole thing will come down." Matt froze, realizing she was right. The beam he'd been moving was supporting what remained of the roof. If it gave way, both Dahlia and her baby would be crushed instantly. "I need to think," he muttered, wiping sweat from his brow with his forearm. His gaze swept the area, searching for anything that might help. His horse stood nearby, and an idea formed. Using his lariat, Matt fashioned a crude system of ropes and pulleys, securing one end to his horse and the other to the main support beam. With careful commands, he urged his horse forward, creating enough tension to hold the beam in place while he worked to free Dahlia and Sarah from beneath. The opening was now large enough for him to reach inside. "Dahlia, I'm going to take Sarah first, then come back for you." She nodded weakly, tears streaming down her dirt-smudged face as she reluctantly relinquished her hold on her daughter. Matt gently extracted the infant, who began to wail as soon as she was separated from her mother. He quickly placed her in a makeshift nest of his saddlebags before returning to Dahlia. "Now for you," he said, reaching in to grasp her outstretched hands. She was more thoroughly trapped than he'd initially realized, her lower body pinned beneath a fallen support post. "I can't feel my legs," she admitted, her voice trembling. "I don't think I can move." "Don't you worry about that," Matt assured her, though concern knotted his stomach. "I'll do the moving for both of us." With renewed determination, he dug around her body, creating space to maneuver. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the devastated homestead. Matt knew he needed to free her before nightfall. The temperature would drop quickly, and Dahlia was already showing signs of shock. "Tell me about yourself," he urged as he worked, hoping to keep her alert and distracted from the pain. "What brings a young woman and her baby out to this wilderness alone?" Dahlia's eyes, a striking shade of green that reminded Matt of spring meadows, focused on him with effort. "Not alone. My husband Thomas. He went to town 3 days ago for supplies. Should have been back yesterday." Matt's hand stilled momentarily. A husband. Of course. A woman like Dahlia wouldn't be without a man to protect her. He pushed aside the unexpected twinge of disappointment and continued his efforts. "Well, Mrs. Carter, I reckon your Thomas will be mighty grateful to find you and little Sarah safe and sound when he returns." A shadow crossed Dahlia's face. "If he returns." There was something in her tone that suggested more than just worry over a delayed traveler. Matt didn't press, focusing instead on freeing her from the wreckage. Finally, after what seemed an eternity of careful maneuvering, Matt managed to lift the beam trapping Dahlia's legs. With a swift motion, he pulled her free and gathered her into his arms. She was lighter than he expected, her slender frame deceptively fragile against his chest. "I've got you," he murmured as she cried out in pain. "You're safe now." The sun had dipped below the horizon by the time Matt had Dahlia and Sarah settled beside a small fire a safe distance from the ruined cabin. He'd fashioned a crude shelter using his bedroll and saddle blanket, then tended to Dahlia's injuries as best he could. Her legs were badly bruised but not broken, a miracle given the weight that had pinned her. "Thank you," she said softly as he offered her water from his canteen. Baby Sarah suckled contentedly at her breast, seemingly unharmed by the ordeal. "You saved our lives." Matt averted his eyes respectfully from the intimate moment between mother and child. "Any man would have done the same." "No," Dahlia countered with unexpected firmness. "Most would have ridden on by, or at best gone for help that would have come too late." He couldn't argue with her assessment. The nearest town, Silver Creek, was a good day's ride away. By the time help arrived, the unstable structure would likely have collapsed entirely. "What will you do now?" he asked, poking at the fire with a stick. "Your home." "Wasn't much of a home," Dahlia replied, her voice hollow. "Thomas chose this spot against my better judgment. Too far from town, too isolated." She stroked Sarah's downy head. "But it was all we had." Matt hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "And Thomas, you seemed uncertain about his return." Dahlia's eyes met his across the firelight, measuring him, deciding how much to trust this stranger who had saved her life. "Thomas has a weakness for gambling and whiskey," she finally admitted. "Each time he goes to town, I wonder if he'll come back at all." "I'm sorry," Matt said simply. "Don't be. I made my choices." Dahlia adjusted Sarah, who had fallen asleep. "I was a school teacher back east. I should have known better than to believe a charming drifter's promises of adventure and prosperity in the West." Matt watched her, struck by her forthrightness. Most women in her position would have defended their husband or changed the subject. Dahlia Carter, it seemed, was not most women. "I can take you to Silver Creek tomorrow," he offered. "They've got a decent doctor who can look at your legs proper. Maybe your husband will be there." "And if he isn't?" The question hung in the air between them. Matt looked away, suddenly finding the stars intensely interesting. "Then I reckon you'll need help getting back on your feet. I know some good folks in town who might take you in until you decide what's next." Dahlia said nothing for a long moment then. Why would you do all this for strangers? It was a fair question. Matt Rhodes wasn't known for involving himself in others' troubles. He'd spent years keeping to himself, working as a horse wrangler and occasional scout, avoiding the complications that came with too much human connection. "I suppose I know what it's like to be alone against the wilderness," he finally answered. Nobody should have to face that, especially not a mother and child. Something unspoken passed between them then, a recognition of shared understanding that transcended their brief acquaintance. Dahlia nodded slightly, accepting his answer and his offer of help. That night, Matt slept lightly, alert to any sound that might signal danger. Twice he rose to check on Dahlia and Sarah, reassuring himself they were comfortable and warm. Each time he found Dahlia's eyes open, watching him with an expression he couldn't quite decipher. Dawn broke clear and cool, painting the eastern sky in shades of pink and gold. Matt prepared a simple breakfast of coffee and hardtack, softened in the coffee for Dahlia's benefit. As they ate, he outlined his plan. "My horse can carry both you and Sarah. I'll walk alongside. We should reach Silver Creek by sundown if we set out within the hour." Dahlia attempted to stand, wincing as weight bore down on her injured legs. Matt was at her side instantly, his arm providing steady support. "I'd be a burden," she protested. "Perhaps you should ride ahead and send back a wagon." "And leave you alone with no shelter and no protection?" Matt shook his head firmly. "Not a chance, Mrs. Carter. Dahlia," she corrected softly. "After what you've done for us, I think formalities seem rather unnecessary." Matt nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Dahlia, then." Before departing, he insisted on salvaging what they could from the cabin ruins. Working methodically, he recovered a small trunk containing Dahlia's clothing and personal items, a few cooking implements, and most precious of all, a locket containing a tiny portrait of Dahlia's parents. "I thought this was lost," she whispered, clutching the silver oval to her chest. "It's all I have left of them." "Sometimes fortune favors the persistent," Matt replied, pleased by her evident joy. With Sarah secured in a sling across Dahlia's chest, and Dahlia herself perched sideways on Matt's sturdy mount, they set off toward Silver Creek. The journey was slow but steady, with frequent stops to rest and tend to Sarah's needs. Throughout the day, they talked, sharing pieces of their lives in the easy manner of travelers with nothing but time and miles ahead. Matt told her of his childhood in Missouri, his father's horse farm, and the restlessness that had driven him west after the war. Dahlia spoke of her years teaching in a small Pennsylvania town, her parents' deaths from influenza, and her fateful meeting with Thomas Carter, a traveling salesman with dreams bigger than his abilities. "He painted such pictures with his words," she recalled, absently stroking Sarah's back as the baby slept against her. "A new life in the West, prosperity, adventure. By the time I realized it was mostly tall tales, we were already married and crossing the Mississippi. And now?" Matt asked carefully. Dahlia sighed, her gaze fixed on the distant mountains. "Now I have Sarah to consider. I can't drag her from place to place chasing Thomas's next big scheme. She deserves stability, safety." Her voice hardened slightly. "I'm prepared to provide that with or without her father's help." Matt admired her determination. Many women in her position would have surrendered to despair or resigned themselves to an uncertain existence tied to an unreliable man. Dahlia Carter, it seemed, possessed a core of steel beneath her gentle exterior. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, the scattered buildings of Silver Creek appeared in the distance. Matt felt an unexpected reluctance as they approached civilization. The day's journey had created a comfortable intimacy between them, one that would necessarily change once they reached town. "We'll get you settled at the boarding house," he told her as they entered the main street. "Mrs. Holloway is a good woman. She'll look after you and Sarah while we sort things out." Dahlia nodded, though uncertainty clouded her expression. "And if Thomas is here," Matt chose his words carefully, "then you'll have decisions to make, but they'll be yours to make, Dahlia, no one else's." The townspeople of Silver Creek turned curious eyes on the unlikely trio as they made their way to the boarding house, a tall, weather-beaten building with lace curtains in the windows that suggested feminine care despite its rough exterior. Matt helped Dahlia dismount, supporting her weight as her stiff legs adjusted to standing. Mrs. Holloway, a plump, gray-haired woman with shrewd eyes and a kind smile, appeared in the doorway before they reached it. "Matthew Rhodes," she called, placing hands on ample hips. "Don't tell me you've finally decided to give up that solitary existence of yours and take a wife." Matt felt heat rise in his face. "It's not like that, Mrs. Holloway. Mrs. Carter here and her daughter were trapped when their cabin collapsed. I'm just helping them get situated." The older woman's expression shifted immediately to concern. "You poor dear," she said, rushing forward to support Dahlia's other side. "Come inside at once. You look ready to drop." Matt found himself relegated to the porch as Mrs. Holloway took charge, bustling Dahlia and Sarah inside with promises of hot food, a warm bath, and clean beds. Before the door closed, Dahlia glanced back at him, a mixture of gratitude and something like regret in her eyes. "Thank you," she said simply. "For everything." He nodded, suddenly awkward. "I'll check in on you tomorrow. Need to ask around about your husband anyway." The mention of Thomas seemed to dim the light in her eyes, but she nodded. "Until tomorrow, then." With that, she was gone, swept into the boarding house by Mrs. Holloway's efficient ministrations. Matt stood for a moment longer, feeling strangely bereft, before leading his horse toward the livery stable. He had inquiries to make. The Golden Nugget Saloon was Silver Creek's central gathering place, where information flowed as freely as the watered-down whiskey. Matt pushed through the batwing doors, his eyes adjusting to the smoky interior as he scanned the room for familiar faces. "Well, look what the wind blew in," called Fergus, the barrel-chested bartender. "Thought you were off chasing wild horses, Rhodes." Matt approached the bar, nodding to acquaintances as he passed. "Plans changed. I'm looking for information on a man named Thomas Carter. Would have come through town within the last few days." Fergus's bushy eyebrows rose. "Carter? Yeah, he was here all right. Spent 3 days losing every cent he had at the poker tables, then tried to win it back by betting on a sure thing that wasn't so sure after all." A sense of foreboding settled in Matt's stomach. "Where is he now?" The bartender exchanged glances with a weathered cowhand seated nearby. "Boot Hill," the cowhand answered bluntly. "Got himself shot after accusing Jim Blackwell of cheating. Turned out Carter was the one with cards up his sleeve." Matt closed his eyes briefly, absorbing the implications. Dahlia was a widow, though she didn't know it yet. Sarah was fatherless, and he was the one who would have to tell them. "When?" he asked, his voice rough. 2 nights ago," Fergus replied. "Sheriff ruled it self-defense. Blackwell's already moved on." Matt ordered a whiskey, downing it in one burning swallow before heading back into the night. He walked aimlessly for a time, considering how to break the news to Dahlia. Would she grieve deeply, despite her ambivalence about her husband? Or would she feel a guilty relief, followed by anxiety about her future? He found himself outside the boarding house again, staring up at a softly lit window where he imagined Dahlia might be putting Sarah to bed. The thought of disrupting whatever peace she had found tonight with news of her husband's death seemed cruel. "Tomorrow," he murmured to himself. "I'll tell her tomorrow." Morning arrived with an unseasonable chill, low clouds threatening rain. Matt had slept poorly, his dreams haunted by images of Dahlia's face when he would deliver the news of her widowhood. He washed and shaved with particular care, as if his appearance might somehow soften the blow. At the boarding house, Mrs. Holloway met him at the door with concerned eyes. "She's in the parlor," the older woman said quietly. "The doctor came by first thing, says she's bruised and exhausted but nothing permanent. That baby is a miracle, not a scratch on her." "And has she asked about her husband?" Mrs. Holloway nodded grimly. "Been asking everyone who comes through the door. I didn't have the heart to tell her what everyone in town knows." Matt steeled himself. "I'll handle it." Dahlia sat by the window in the small parlor, Sarah asleep in a borrowed cradle beside her. She wore a borrowed dress, her hair neatly braided and falling over one shoulder. In the clear morning light, with the dirt and fear washed away, her beauty was striking, not the artificial perfection of painted saloon girls, but something deeper and more authentic. She looked up as he entered, hope flaring briefly in her eyes before reading the truth in his expression. "He's dead, isn't he?" she asked directly. Matt removed his hat, twisting the brim slightly in his hands. "Yes, I'm sorry, Dahlia." She absorbed the news with remarkable composure, her gaze shifting to her sleeping daughter. "How?" she asked after a moment. Matt considered softening the truth but decided she deserved honesty. "Gunfight. He accused a man of cheating at cards. It went badly." A bitter smile touched her lips. "Of course it did. That was Thomas, always convinced someone else was responsible for his misfortunes." She looked up at Matt, her eyes dry but full of emotion. "Did he lose our money first? The money for the supplies we needed?" Matt nodded reluctantly. "From what I gathered, yes." Dahlia closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, there was a clarity and resolve that surprised him. "Then I am truly on my own now," she said, more to herself than to Matt. "I suspected as much when he didn't return, but suspecting and knowing are different things." Matt took a step forward. "You're not alone, Dahlia. This town has good people who will help you get back on your feet." "And then what?" she challenged, a flash of fire in her green eyes. "Depend on charity until I can find another husband to support us. Become the town's object of pity, the widow with the fatherless child." Her vehemence caught him off guard. "I didn't mean, I know you didn't," she said, softening slightly. "Forgive me. You've been nothing but kind. It's just, I've spent too many years letting others determine my path. First my parents, then Thomas. I need to stand on my own now, for Sarah's sake if not my own." Matt found himself admiring her spirit even as he worried about the practical challenges she would face. "What will you do?" Dahlia looked around the neat parlor, considering. "Mrs. Holloway mentioned they need a teacher here. The last one left to get married 2 months ago. You'd stay in Silver Creek." Matt couldn't keep the surprise from his voice. "Why not? It seems a decent town. Sarah and I need to settle somewhere." Her expression became thoughtful. "Unless you think there's a reason we shouldn't stay." The question hung between them, laden with unspoken implications. Matt found himself at a crossroads. The sensible part of him, the part that had kept him safe and unencumbered for years, urged caution. But something deeper, something he'd thought long buried, pushed him toward a different answer. "I think Silver Creek would be lucky to have you," he said quietly. "Both of you." Relief flickered across her features, followed by something warmer. "Thank you. That means a great deal coming from you." An awkward silence fell, broken only by Sarah's soft baby sounds as she stirred in her cradle. Matt cleared his throat. "There'll be arrangements to make. For Thomas, I mean." Dahlia nodded, her expression hardening slightly. "I suppose there will, though I doubt he left enough money for a proper burial." "I can help with that," Matt offered. She shook her head firmly. "You've done more than enough already. I'll speak with the sheriff about the simplest option. Thomas wouldn't have wanted fuss anyway." Matt recognized the pride in her stance, the determination to handle her own affairs. He respected it, even as he wished she would allow him to ease her burden. "At least let me speak to the school board on your behalf," he suggested. "Jebediah Porter is the head, and I saved his prize bull last winter when it fell through the ice. He owes me a favor." A small smile touched Dahlia's lips. "Very well, I accept that offer with gratitude." The next days passed in a flurry of activity. Thomas Carter was buried in a simple ceremony attended only by Dahlia, Matt, and the preacher. Dahlia stood dry-eyed beside the grave, Sarah bundled against her chest, her expression one of resignation rather than grief. "He had his good points," she told Matt afterward as they walked back toward town. "He could make me laugh like no one else, and he was genuinely excited about becoming a father. I think he truly believed each new scheme would be the one to provide for us properly." "But," Matt prompted gently. "But good intentions pave more than just the road to hell," she sighed. "They also pave the road to hungry nights and leaking roofs and endless disappointments." Matt nodded, understanding. He'd known men like Thomas Carter, charming dreamers who left practical concerns to others while they chased the next horizon. True to his word, Matt spoke with Jebediah Porter about the teaching position. To his surprise, the stern-faced rancher who served as head of the school board needed little convincing. "We're desperate for a proper teacher," Porter admitted. "These youngsters have been running wild for months. If Mrs. Carter has experience and can start right away, the position is hers." And so, within a week of her rescue from the collapsed cabin, Dahlia Carter found herself installed as Silver Creek schoolteacher, with a small but comfortable room behind the schoolhouse converted into living quarters for her and Sarah. The townswomen, led by Mrs. Holloway, rallied around the young widow, providing furniture, linens, clothing, and the countless necessities for establishing a new home. Matt kept a respectful distance during this time, conscious of Dahlia's need to establish herself independently in the community. He checked in periodically, bringing small gifts, a rocking chair he'd traded for with a furniture maker in the next town, a handcrafted wooden toy for Sarah, but never staying long enough to invite gossip. Spring deepened into summer. Matt returned to his work with horses, breaking and training stock for local ranchers, though he found himself spending more time in and around Silver Creek than ever before. If anyone noticed that his visits to town often coincided with the end of the school day, when Dahlia could be seen walking home with Sarah in her arms, they were kind enough not to mention it. It was on one such afternoon in late July that Matt approached the schoolhouse just as the last students were racing away toward home. Dahlia stood on the steps, watching them go with a smile that transformed her face. She had filled out in the months since her ordeal, her cheeks rosy with health, her green eyes bright. She wore her light brown hair pulled back in a practical bun during school hours, but Matt had once glimpsed it loose around her shoulders when he'd arrived unexpectedly on a Sunday morning. The image had stayed with him. "Mr. Rhodes," she greeted him warmly, though with the formality she maintained in public. "What brings you to town today?" "Thought I might walk you and Sarah home," he replied, removing his hat. "If that would be agreeable." Something in her expression softened. Very agreeable. Let me just gather my things. As they walked the short distance to her quarters, Sarah babbled happily from her mother's arms, reaching pudgy hands toward Matt when he came into her line of sight. Without thinking, he offered her his finger, which she grasped with surprising strength. "She remembers you," Dahlia observed. "She always gets excited when you visit." "Smart girl," Matt replied, making a silly face that caused Sarah to giggle. "Takes after her mother that way." A faint blush colored Dahlia's cheeks. They had reached her door, and she hesitated before inviting him inside. "Would you care for some coffee? It's fresh made." The small living quarters were neat and cozy, transformed by Dahlia's touch from a plain room into a home. Wildflowers brightened the table, and handmade curtains framed the windows. Books, her most prized possessions, lined a simple shelf Matt had built for her last month. "How are the students progressing?" he asked, as she poured coffee into two mismatched cups. "Remarkably well, considering most of them had never held a pencil before I arrived," Dahlia replied, settling Sarah on a quilt on the floor with her toys. "Billy Porter can already read simple words, and he's only 5. Jebediah must be proud." "Pretends not to be, but I've caught him grinning when Billy recites his letters." She sat across from Matt, her hands cradling her cup. "And your work? Any progress with that black stallion you mentioned?" They fell into easy conversation, as they always did. Matt found himself sharing thoughts and observations he'd never voiced to another soul, while Dahlia spoke of her hopes for the school and her plans for Sarah's future. Time slipped away unnoticed until the lengthening shadows reminded Matt of propriety. "I should go," he said reluctantly, rising. "People will talk if I stay too late." Dahlia's expression clouded slightly. "People already talk, Matt. Apparently, a widow should either be in perpetual mourning or actively seeking a new husband. My contentment with independence confuses them." Matt studied her face, trying to read the emotions beneath her words. "Does it bother you, the talk?" She considered the question seriously. "Not for myself, but I worry for Sarah and for you." "Me?" He was genuinely surprised. "Your reputation. You've been so kind to us, and yet you maintain a certain distance. I've wondered if that's to protect yourself from association with a woman of questionable standing." Matt stared at her, momentarily speechless. "Dahlia, no, that's not." He ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "I've kept a respectful distance because I thought that's what you wanted, needed." Her eyes widened slightly. "What I wanted? You spoke so powerfully about standing on your own, about not depending on others to determine your path." He took a step toward her, then stopped himself. "The last thing I wanted was to impose myself where I wasn't welcome." Understanding dawned in her expression, followed by something that might have been amusement. "Oh, Matt, for a man so perceptive about horses, you can be remarkably blind about people." Before he could respond to this cryptic statement, Sarah began to fuss, effectively ending the moment. Dahlia scooped up her daughter, who was clearly ready for her evening feeding. "Perhaps we could continue this conversation another time," she suggested, a new warmth in her voice. "Sunday, after church? Mrs. Holloway has offered to watch Sarah so I could have an afternoon to myself." Matt recognized the invitation for what it was, a chance to speak privately, away from the constraints of propriety that governed their interactions in town. His heart hammered against his ribs. "Sunday," he agreed. "I'll come by after the service." The following days crawled by with excruciating slowness. Matt found himself distracted during his work, earning good-natured ribbing from the ranch hands when he nearly allowed a half-broken colt to bolt because his mind was elsewhere. Sunday dawned clear and perfect, as if even the weather approved of the coming afternoon. Matt attended the church service, something he rarely did, and found his gaze continually drawn to Dahlia. seated near the front with Sarah on her lap. She wore her best dress, a deep blue that complemented her coloring, and had arranged her hair in a more elaborate style than her usual practical bun. After the service, he waited anxiously as she handed Sarah over to Mrs. Holloway, who gave Matt a knowing look that made him feel transparent. When Dahlia finally approached him, a small basket over her arm, his mouth went dry. "I thought we might have a picnic," she suggested. "By the creek. It's cooler there." They walked in companionable silence through town and beyond, finding a shady spot beneath a cottonwood tree where the creek widened into a gentle pool. Dahlia spread a blanket and began unpacking her basket: fresh bread, cheese, dried apple slices, and 2 carefully wrapped pieces of Mrs. Holloway's famous berry pie. "This is quite a feast," Matt observed, helping her arrange the food. "A celebration of sorts," Dahlia replied enigmatically. "What are we celebrating?" she smiled, passing him a plate. "New beginnings and clarity." They ate, talking easily about inconsequential matters: the town's preparations for the harvest festival, the progress of Matt's horse training, a humorous incident involving the mayor's wife, and an escaped chicken. It wasn't until they had finished the pie that Dahlia returned to their interrupted conversation from days earlier. "I've been thinking about what you said," she began, her fingers idly plucking at the blanket's edge, "about keeping your distance out of respect for my independence." Matt nodded, suddenly nervous. It seemed the right thing to do. It was considerate, she acknowledged, but perhaps unnecessary. His heart skipped. "How so?" Dahlia met his gaze directly, a courage in her eyes that he had admired from the first moment he'd seen her trapped beneath the cabin ruins. "Independence doesn't mean isolation, Matt. It means making my own choices, including the choice to welcome someone into my life." "Into our lives," she amended, clearly including Sarah in her thoughts. Matt swallowed hard. "And is that something you might choose, to welcome someone, not someone?" she corrected softly. "You." The world seemed to still around them, the creeks babbling, the birds singing. Even the rustling leaves all faded into insignificance compared to the moment crystallizing between them. "Dahlia," he began, his voice hoarse with emotion, "I'm not a wealthy man. I don't have much to offer except hard work and loyalty. Those are worth more than gold to me," she replied. "I've had pretty words and empty promises. I'd rather have honest toil and steadfast devotion." Matt reached across the blanket, taking her hand in his. Her fingers were slender but strong, marked with the small calluses of a working woman. He ran his thumb across her knuckles, marveling at how perfectly her hand fit in his. "I've never felt for anyone what I feel for you," he admitted. "From the moment I pulled you from that cabin, something changed in me. It scared me at first, still does if I'm honest." "What scares you?" she asked. "How much I care, how quickly it happened, the thought that I might not be enough for you and Sarah." Dahlia shifted closer, her free hand coming up to touch his cheek. "You dug through a collapsed building with your bare hands to save a woman and child you'd never met. If that's not enough, I don't know what could be." The distance between them seemed to close of its own accord. Matt's arm slipped around her waist, drawing her gently against him. Her eyes fluttered closed as his lips found hers in a kiss that began tentatively but quickly deepened, with the release of months of unspoken longing. When they finally separated, both breathless, Matt rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he whispered. "Both of you. I think I have almost from the beginning." Tears glistened in Dahlia's eyes, but her smile was radiant. "And we love you. Sarah already adores you, and I." She took a shaky breath. "I've been afraid to admit how much I've come to depend on your steady presence in our lives." "You don't have to be afraid anymore," Matt promised. And depending on someone who depends equally on you isn't weakness, it's partnership. They spent the remainder of the afternoon by the creek, talking of the future, making plans both cautious and hopeful. The sun was beginning to set when they finally gathered the remains of their picnic and started back toward town. "People really will talk now," Dahlia observed with a small smile as Matt openly held her hand on the walk back. "Let them," he replied, squeezing her fingers gently. "Though perhaps we should give them something more substantial to discuss." She glanced at him questioningly. "Marry me," he said simply. "Not tomorrow or next week, whenever you feel ready, but know that's what I want. A life with you and Sarah, a family of our own." Dahlia stopped walking, turning to face him fully in the golden light of the setting sun. "Are you certain?" Taking on another man's child, a woman with a past, Matt silenced her concerns with a gentle finger to her lips. "Sarah is a blessing, not a burden, and your past has made you who you are, the woman I love. I'm more certain of this than I've ever been of anything." Joy bloomed across her features. "Then yes, Matthew Rhodes, I will marry you, and we'll build that life together, all three of us." The following months brought changes both swift and gradual to their lives. Matt continued his horse training but began construction on a small ranch of his own, using savings he'd accumulated over years of solitary living. The land he chose was just outside Silver Creek, close enough for Dahlia to continue teaching until they decided otherwise. They were married in October, when the aspen trees blazed gold against the mountainsides. The entire town turned out for the celebration, genuinely happy for the schoolteacher who had won their hearts and the formerly solitary horseman who had found his family in the most unexpected circumstances. Sarah, now crawling and attempting her first words, was a central part of the ceremony. Dressed in a tiny white dress Mrs. Holloway had sewn for the occasion. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, it was Matt who held the baby while he kissed his bride, a symbol of the family they had already become. Their home was completed just before the first snow, a sturdy 4-room cabin with a view of both mountains and prairie. Matt had insisted on extra strong support beams and a solid foundation, memories of Dahlia's collapsed cabin driving his careful planning. She had smiled at his thoroughness, but understood the love behind it. Winter settled over the land, wrapping their new home in a blanket of white. On Christmas Eve, with Sarah asleep in the cradle Matt had crafted for her, they sat before the fireplace, content in the simple pleasure of being together. "I have something for you," Dahlia said, retrieving a small package from behind a cushion. "It isn't much, but—" Matt unwrapped the cloth to find a hand-stitched leather wallet, his initials worked into the corner in neat, tiny stitches. "It's perfect," he said sincerely, running his fingers over the craftsmanship. "Thank you." "Open it," she urged, an unusual nervousness in her voice. Inside, he found a small folded paper. Curious, he opened it to discover a tiny drawing, clearly Dahlia's work of their family: Matt, Dahlia, Sarah, and a smaller figure beside Sarah. His eyes flew to hers, questioning. "In June," she confirmed, her hand moving to rest on her still flat stomach. "Our family is growing." Matt's whoop of joy woke Sarah, who began to wail indignantly at the disruption of her sleep. Laughing, they went together to soothe her, Matt lifting her from her cradle while Dahlia sang a soft lullaby. As the baby's eyes drifted closed again, secure in Matt's strong arms, he met his wife's gaze over their daughter's head. "Did you ever imagine, that day when the cabin collapsed, that we would end up here?" he asked quietly. Dahlia shook her head, her expression thoughtful. "I was just trying to survive that day, to keep Sarah alive. The future was an unimaginable luxury." And now, a slow smile spread across her face. "Now the future is a gift I unwrap each morning when I wake beside you." Matt carefully laid Sarah back in her cradle, then drew Dahlia into his arms. "I never believed in fate before I found you," he murmured against her hair. "But something led me to that ridge at exactly the right moment. Something made me hear your cries when I might have ridden past." "Perhaps it was simply the man you are," Dahlia suggested, pressing a kiss to his jaw. "A man who couldn't ignore someone in need. A man willing to dig through a collapsed building with his bare hands to save strangers." "Not strangers," Matt corrected, tightening his embrace. "Family I hadn't met yet." Outside, snow fell silently, adding another layer to the protective blanket surrounding their home. Inside, warmth and love created a different kind of protection, one built not of wood and stone, but of commitment and devotion. As spring returned to the land, life blossomed everywhere in the wildflowers dotting the prairie, in Sarah's first tottering steps across the cabin floor, and in the growing swell of Dahlia's belly. Matt found himself watching his wife with wonder as she moved through her days, teaching until the school board insisted she take time to rest, nurturing Sarah's curiosity about the world, and helping him establish their small but thriving horse ranch. "You're staring again," Dahlia observed one evening as she sat by the window, her mending forgotten in her lap as she gazed out at the sunset. "Can't help it," Matt replied unapologetically. "You're beautiful." She laughed, the sound as clear and refreshing as the creek that ran near their property. "I'm as big as one of your horses." "Twice as lovely, though," he countered, crossing the room to kneel beside her chair. He placed a gentle hand on her rounded abdomen, feeling the strong kicks of their child. And infinitely more precious. Their son arrived in early June, a robust baby with a shock of dark hair and his father's determined chin. They named him William, after Dahlia's father, but from the first day, Matt called him Will, a name that spoke of strength and possibility. Sarah, now walking steadily and chattering in simple sentences, approached her baby brother with solemn curiosity. "My baby?" she asked, looking up at Dahlia with earnest green eyes so like her mother's. "Our baby," Dahlia corrected gently. "Your brother. You'll help Mama take care of him, won't you?" The little girl nodded with grave importance, reaching out to pat Will's tiny hand with extreme gentleness. Matt felt his heart constrict at the sight of his family, his wife, and the two children who had his complete devotion, regardless of blood ties. That night, with Will sleeping in his cradle and Sarah finally exhausted from the excitement of the day, Matt found Dahlia standing on the porch, gazing up at the star-filled sky. "Should you be up?" he asked, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. She leaned into him, drawing strength from his solid presence. "Probably not, but I needed a moment to marvel at what? At how life unfolds." She turned in his embrace to face him. 3 years ago, I was a naive schoolteacher following a charming dreamer west. 2 years ago, I was trapped in a collapsed cabin, certain Sarah and I would die there. And now, she gestured toward the house behind them where their children slept peacefully. "Now I have everything I never dared hope for." Matt brushed a strand of hair from her face, tucking it behind her ear in a gesture of familiar tenderness. "We've been blessed," he agreed. "Though I maintain it was my superior horse-tracking skills that led me to you." She laughed softly, rising on tiptoe to kiss him. "Is that so?" And here I thought it was my extraordinarily loud screaming. "That too," he conceded with a grin. "You have many talents, Mrs. Rhodes. As do you, Mr. Rhodes." Her expression grew more serious, chief among them being your capacity for love. "Sarah adores you as if you'd been her father from birth. This land thrives under your care, and I—" Her voice faltered slightly with emotion. "I am more deeply loved than I ever imagined possible." Matt drew her closer, resting his cheek against her hair. That's because you make it easy, Dahlia. Loving you and Sarah, and now Will, is as natural as breathing. They stood together in the quiet night, the sounds of the wilderness a familiar symphony around them. From inside came the soft cry of their newborn son, and Dahlia reluctantly pulled away. "Duty calls," she sighed, though her eyes shone with contentment rather than weariness. Matt caught her hand before she could go inside. "I'll never regret it, you know. Not one moment from digging through that cabin to changing diapers at midnight. It's all been worth it." Dahlia's smile held all the warmth and promise of their life together. "I know," she said simply, "because it has been for me too." As the years passed, the Rhodes family prospered in ways both material and immaterial. Matt's skill with horses brought a steady income and growing reputation, while Dahlia eventually opened a small school on their own property when Will reached teaching age, joined 2 years later by their daughter Emma. Sarah grew into a beautiful young woman with her mother's intelligence and her adoptive father's affinity for horses. Though she knew the truth of her parentage, Dahlia and Matt had always been honest with her. She considered Matt her true father in every way that mattered. On the 20th anniversary of the day Matt had pulled Dahlia and Sarah from the collapsed cabin, the entire family gathered for a special celebration. Their home had expanded over the years, but the original cabin remained at its heart, a reminder of the humble beginnings of their shared life. "A toast," Matt proposed, raising his glass as they sat around the large dining table that had hosted countless family meals, homework sessions, and serious discussions. "To collapsed cabins and the treasures they sometimes contain." Dahlia laughed, the lines around her eyes deepening with the genuine mirth that had become her hallmark. At 45, she retained the beauty that had first caught Matt's attention, enhanced now by the confidence and serenity of a woman who knew herself and her place in the world. "To bare hands and brave hearts," she countered, raising her own glass. Their children Sarah, now 21 and recently engaged, Will, 19 and planning to study veterinary medicine back east, Emma, 17 and the spitting image of her father, and Robert, their surprise blessing who had arrived when Dahlia was 40, joined the toast with varying degrees of understanding about the significance of the day. Later, when the younger children had gone to bed and Sarah had departed with her fiancé for a proper but extended goodnight, Matt and Dahlia sat on the porch swing that had replaced the simple bench of their early years. 20 years, Matt marveled, his arm around his wife in a posture so familiar it was almost part of them. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday, and sometimes it feels like another lifetime," Dahlia replied, her head resting comfortably on his shoulder. "A lifetime lived by different people." He nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. They had both changed over the decades, shaped by joys and sorrows, triumphs and challenges. The young widow and the solitary cowboy had evolved into the people they were now, partners in the truest sense. Their lives so interwoven it was impossible to imagine one without the other. "You ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't heard you that day?" Matt asked, voicing a question that occasionally still haunted his dreams. "If I'd been just a little further away, or if the wind had been blowing differently." Dahlia was quiet for a moment, considering. "I used to wonder that, especially in the early years. But I've come to believe that some things are meant to be, not in a fatalistic way, but in the sense that there are currents in life drawing certain souls together." She shifted to look up at him. "We might have met some other way in some other time, but I think we were always destined to find each other." Matt pressed a kiss to her forehead, his heart full of the quiet joy that had become the foundation of his existence. "I like that thought, that no matter what, we would have found our way to this life. This very good life," Dahlia amended, snuggling closer against the evening chill. As stars appeared in the darkening sky, Matt reflected on the journey that had brought them here, from a desperate rescue to a love that had grown deeper and richer with each passing year. The memory of digging through that collapsed cabin with his bare hands remained vivid, but it was no longer just the beginning of their story. It was one chapter in a continuing narrative of a family built not just on blood, but on choice and commitment. "I love you, Dahlia Rhodes," he murmured into the peaceful night, "today and always." Her hand found his in the darkness, fingers intertwining with the ease of long practice. "And I love you, Matthew Rhodes, for saving us then and for every day since." Together, they sat in contented silence, listening to the night sounds of the land they had made their own, surrounded by the life they had built together, a life that had begun in crisis, but had flourished into something beautiful and enduring, as strong as the hands that had once dug through rubble to uncover the greatest treasures Matt would ever find.